right, so thank you all for joining for tonight. Our topic tonight is redistricting, which had a, as we've heard, had some action in the state house today, and we have a lot of questions about it. So first I want to introduce Ken. He's going to talk about oh, and both of you should know I've been promoting you constantly. Everyone knows your bios already. I'm very excited for this topic. So Ken is going to talk to us about statistics and the census and how the population is of New Hampshire and any other fun stats he wants to give us. And then Representative Marjorie Smith is going to talk about the redistricting process, as she was one of the one, or if the only Democrat sitting on the committee. So she'll share that progress with us. So Ken, so I'm going to stay quiet, but obviously, so I'm going to mute myself, but feel free if anyone has any questions to just raise your hand or jump in. Okay. And Ken, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Amanda, for inviting me to do this. It's fun to do. And I understand Ken Johnson recommended me. So it's we've done a few things together. He's definitely a good person to hear information from as well. I'm just going to go ahead and try to share my screen here and see if we get the right thing up. Let's see. Okay. So now I need to start my slideshow. Hang on. There we go. Okay. All right. So I'm Ken Gallagher, and I'm a principal planner with the Office of Planning and Development. I'm also the New Hampshire State Data Center coordinator, and I'm also the governor's liaison for the 2020 census. And I'll explain a little bit what that means. I don't think it actually means a lot, but anyway. Here's what I'm going to talk about tonight. I'm going to just give a little background on how the 2020 census was conducted. There was an issue with the timeline, mainly because of COVID, but for other reasons as well. I'm going to go over the 2 data releases that have already occurred, and then talk about the 3rd one that's not going to be here for a while. Just a little background also on census geography, how that works. And then talk about 2 things that were different this time around for the census that made it a lot harder to be conducted. And then we'll get to the results. And I kind of wanted to focus especially on the demographic changes that are going on in the state and what's going on with diversity and that sort of thing. So this is a slide about the New Hampshire State Data Center. As I said, I'm a state employee. We're part of the Office of Planning and Development. Up until last June, we were part of the Office of Strategic Initiatives, but we got, you all know this, we got split to Energy formed its own department, and we're now with the Department of Business and Economic Affairs, which is working out pretty well. And we have several different aspects of our state data center mission, where we distribute and interpret census data. So we have a website, and we have the public has the ability to contact us directly as well if they have specific data type questions, things that they can't find on the census website, that sort of thing. Also, we turn around and we supply our own state data that we collect to the census, things like information about numbers of people living in group quarters, for instance, or reviewing what they do for population estimates. We conduct our own population estimates, and this is a statutory requirement. We do it annually for all the municipalities in the state. That's for the distribution of the meals and rooms tax. Right now, we're just getting ready to start up our first new population projections project of the decade, now that the census data is starting to come out. So we release something twice per decade where we look forward 20 or 30 years and see what we expect the state's population to be doing. And then finally, I am the governor's liaison to the Census Bureau, which is an entirely nonpartisan position. And I really don't have much to do with the process other than to sort of reach out to the legislators and make sure they have what they need. And the person who, I think they contracted with somebody, right, to run their own software. So, he contacted me, and, basically we made sure that everything was all they had what they needed, the way the census released it. All right, so I want to just sort of talk a little bit about how the census timeline went, because it was different than in previous decades. Everything got delayed, as you know, because of COVID. So self-response this is where people get the mailers and then they're encouraged to go online or fill out the form by mail. That normally would have stopped in May. They kept going all the way till October 15th of last year. The group quarters, so dormitories and jails and things like that, got pushed back until, all the way through the summer. Homeless and transitory counts got pushed back. The non-response follow-up, which is the classic one with the census takers coming to people's doors, they didn't get started until August. Again, everything went until October 15th. What this meant was that there was all sorts of talk all through the fall as to whether they could get it done by December 31st, which was the normal date for delivering the apportionment counts. And it turned out to simply not be possible. So as of April 26th, that's when those counts were delivered. And I'll describe that in a subsequent slide. And then the redistricting data, which is what I'm mainly going to be talking about, just came out at the end of this past summer. That's not all the data. There's this last thing called demographic and housing characteristics files, and that will be coming out. We don't know when yet. So it might be guessing late spring, early summer, but we just don't know for sure. So just briefly about the apportionment data. As we know, this is really why we conduct the census. It's to distribute the 435 seats in the House of Representatives. One thing that isn't totally obvious to people is that there's actually a different number that's used for the state's population in this one count than for the rest of the census, because we're talking about not just the resident population, but we're also talking about all the overseas federal employees, military and civilian, and their dependents. So as you can see, the apportionment population is actually a little less than 2,000 more than the actual resident population. And the resident population, though, is what we're going to be using as the total population for all the subsequent data releases. So this is the redistricting data that came out in August. And it's basically, it's a limited amount of data. It's just what's needed, really, to produce new voting districts. So there's a table that has race categories. There's a second table that has the race categories again, but applied against Hispanic/Latino status, which is classified as an ethnicity rather than a race. And then they do it over again with the third and the fourth tables, except for this time, it's just for the voting age population, age 18 and over. Fifth table is group quarters population. And so this actually, they break it out by types. Hang on, I've got some notes here. So the types include, as I said, I think before, college dormitories is one, prisons is another, long care, nursing facilities is another. So those are, that's sort of, you can get that information in this redistricting data. And then finally, the occupancy status, number of housing units broken down into either occupied or vacant at this level. And I think I can make this, I could probably send you this PowerPoint, Amanda, in case people would like to try the links. I've got some links in here that people can go to. I'm not going to do it tonight, but the data came both in this legacy format, which is really the power user type thing. It's a bunch of flat files, and but they give you, the census did actually give out a whole bunch of table shells that made it kind of easy to produce Access or whatever type of statistical software files you needed. But then after in mid-September, all of this data is now also available at data.census.gov. And that's a link there also that you'll be able to follow when I send that out. And that's a lot easier if you just need to ask a few questions about have a limited number of questions you need to ask. And so this has all of the redistricting data, so those 6 tables that I described before, and it's available at all levels of census geography, from the national level all the way down to the census block. And like I said, that was only some of the data still. So the rest of the data is coming out in these things called DHC files, demographic and housing characteristics. You'll notice we didn't say anything about median age. We didn't say anything about gender. This sort of information, age cohorts, 5-year age groups, all the information about relationships, who's a head of a household, how many, are people married, how many children, that sort of thing. All of that's not coming out yet, not until we get the DHC files, hopefully next year. And then the detailed DHC files, which I think will come out even later. This gets down to single-year age groups, very granular race and ethnicity combinations, household types in combination with race. They'll have race statistics for the group quarters populations. And I wish I could tell you when it would be coming out, but it's not out yet. Here's just a real quick, kind of messy looking slide, just to give you an idea of what's available for census geographies. You can get it by state, you can get it by county. We like to have it by town, of course, and you can get it by town. A lot of times the census, various census applications and things, or people who use the data like to use census tracts. Mm-hmm. Census tracts are these things that have the blue-green heavy lines around them. Those are drawn with input from the regional planning commissions in each state. But basically they're drawn so that they all have about the same population, around 5,000, give or take 1 or 2,000. So that's why you can see that Durham, for instance, has been broken into 4 tracts, while Lee and Madbury, right there, are both in one single tract, number 805. So a lot of that is going on around the state. It's hard, like for instance, if we're trying to do things with the regional planning commissions, the regional planning commission boundaries will follow town lines, and a lot of times that might split up a tract, for instance, and it makes it hard to get census data for the exact boundaries of the planning commissions. There's also these little things in yellow that you see, Raymond, Epping, Newfields, Exeter, things like that. Those are special little census geographies called census designated places. If this were anywhere else in the country other than New England, those would probably be things with their own political boundaries, like a village or something, or a city. But here, the whole town is the thing, the whole town of Epping. So the census, again, with help from the regional planning commissions, went in and drew what they thought were useful lines around the actual villages of certain size. Obviously, Lee doesn't get one for some reason. Maybe they're not big enough. But that's another way that data is available. And I'm not showing the lowest levels of geography, which are the blocks and the block groups. And I'm going to discuss a little bit about what's going on with the data as it relates to blocks in a few more slides. Okay, so challenges. The first one that we all know about is the fact of the delays caused by COVID. And a couple things, especially besides the fact of the delays, there was a bit of a problem collecting people's locations. First of all, people started fleeing their cities and went off to their second homes. And so we were expecting to see a lot of that. And I think we found less than we expected, but we did see a few towns where it looks like that possibly happened, that people moved out to their condo in the Mount Washington Valley or wherever, and then said, hey, we're staying here. So this is actually where we now live. And then the other issue has to do with college towns. The college students all got sent home before Census Day, so mid-March. The census immediately put out a rule. College students were still to be counted at their college residence, whether that means in the dorms or in their off-campus housing. So for the dorms, the census had relationships with all of the colleges and universities, and we were able to get that information about who was living in the dorms and their characteristics. It was a little bit harder, I think, trying to find, make sure that the students who went, quote unquote, home, back to their parents' house, for instance, or somewhere else, trying to contact them and make sure that they were actually still counted back in their college town. We had one town, which Henniker, home of New England College, actually, where we had something else weird happen. And I'm not sure it really had to do with COVID, but it might have been related, where Henniker wound up with 1,200 more people than they expected. And that's probably because it looks like the census counted they counted the whole enrollment of New England College and put them all in dorms. And we know from doing our surveys that only about a quarter of the student population actually lives in dorms. So I think, I think something not like that, but we've seen a few other places where that might have happened to a lesser degree. And so I'm saying some of these anomalies aren't necessarily due to COVID. Oh, I think, yeah, okay, here's a table where we were looking at basically how our population estimates did in comparison to what the census numbers were. And you'll see the numbers here that you'll see here, so 4,000 or so for Manchester. That's how much higher the census count was than what our estimate was for the same year. So we had a few places like Manchester and Nashua where they were unexpectedly high, and that may have to do with increases of numbers of people living in housing units. That's probably what's going on there. There's Henniker as well with the 1,200 extra students. There's a few like Waterville Valley and Jackson over on the second column with the percentages, where I think it really did have something to do with people claiming they're moving to their second homes and declaring themselves to be residents. Waterville Valley went from 250 to 500, and Jackson went up by 20%. Moultonborough is a special case because it was abnormally low for 2010. So this actually just sort of brought Moultonborough back into line. It seems like there's some wiggle room in certain towns especially when there's places with a lot of second homes. Moultonborough is certainly one of them. And I think some people got missed in 2010 who now got counted properly this time around in Moultonborough. And then I added at the bottom, people were asking about Durham as well. And we were concerned that because there's a lot of off-campus housing in Durham. It looks like they might have missed a few. Our estimates were higher by about 560. It could have been worse. So that's kind of where we're at right now with Durham. I'm not sure whether the town has been pursuing anything further with that. But the second thing, and this is I'm kind of mostly just gonna have to read my notes here because I still don't really understand what's going on with disclosure avoidance, not well enough to really teach it to anybody. But this has to do with the fact that the census has a very strict policy of fully protecting people's individual privacy, Title 13 US Code. And what they're discovering is that there's so many administrative databases out there and so much computing power that it is becoming possible. They've run some experiments and been able to identify something like 57% of the population using basically these recreation of information using all these adjunct sources. 57% had some unique combination of demographic traits at the block level. So they found that in the past they were trying to protect this through data swapping. You just simply swap numbers from one block to another, back and forth, and they're finding that's not good enough. So they now have come up with a technique called differential privacy. It requires very high-powered computing, and the practical effect is that it seems to be really slowing down how fast we're able to get the data out from the census. But the way they talk about it, they're injecting randomly generated noise into the census results. And they have what's called a privacy loss budget, where they can sort of calibrate how much noise they put in. So yes, that means there's going to be more errors in some levels of the data than in others. And what they're doing is what's called this top-down algorithm, which means they want the data to be absolutely precise and correct at the highest level, so at the national level. Going down through different levels of geography, it still stays pretty precise until you get down to basically the block level. Above the block level, there's blocks which are approximately well, we don't know. Blocks can be any level, they're a geographic thing. But then they have block groups, which generally are about 800 to 1,000 people. And what we're being told is that if you really want to make sure you're not getting wrong information, and you have to avoid looking at the blocks, basically, and have to at least go up to the block group level, or at least aggregate your blocks up to about 500 people at least before you start really being able to trust what you're seeing in terms of basically not just total populations, but especially once you break it down into things like the demographic characteristics. There are some numbers which are not subject to disclosure avoidance. So the total population at state level has no noise at all injected into it. That's exactly what their count adds up to. Also, the number and the type of the group quarters facilities will be correct at the block level, and the number of housing units in every block, both occupied and vacant, are not being distorted, let's say, or having error injected. Again, because that's not personal data; those are physical features. But the predicted practical effects that people should expect to see is that you might find a block where there's a population of people living in households, but no housing units, for instance. Or conversely, you'll have a count of a certain number of occupied housing units, but no population given in the block. You'll have weird things like that, or children in a block with no parents listed in that block. So it will be, it's kind of unfortunate that, we like to think we can get down to the block level and count everybody, but it's basically become too easy to pick out people's private information by doing that. And here's what I was saying, actually, so the recommended minimum aggregated population is about 450 at this point. So that's about half of a block group, basically. And I'll supply a link here if people wish to really dig into it, or if they're statistically trained, that sort of thing, to see what the census has been up to. All right, so I'm going to move on here. We do have some results still, and I'm going to be talking mostly at the statewide and county level. First thing, and this really continues the narrative that we've been seeing for a while, both with our estimates and with the last decade's census. The population growth continues to be slower in the state. We're down to 4.6% over the last decade. Previous decade was 6.5%, and we probably remember some point during the 60s, from the 60s through the 80s, where the growth was actually 20% each decade, over 20%. This time around, 3 counties lost population. Last time it was just Coos, and now Sullivan and Cheshire have been added to that. We are seeing an increase in racial and ethnic diversity, and especially in the especially within the children population. Other things that we'd like to know about, we're just not able to look at yet, at least not through the census data, such as age groups, gender, and then housing details. All right, so I was having a hard time getting the colors to agree. I was having different screens that I was looking at, they were coming out differently. So I'm seeing kind of lavender largely, with some tan as well. Just sort of 2 side-by-side maps here. It's showing just the raw population change, total population by town. The left-hand map is 2000 to 2010, and the right-hand map is 2010 to 2020. And let me check my notes here, make sure I'm tell you what I want to tell you. Okay, so the first thing that you'll see is that there's a lot more tan on the on the map to the right, and areas that are tan or darker brown are towns which lost population. So this is what, and we're seeing it's mostly down in the northern part of the state and down the western side of the state. And also we are seeing, while there's still quite a few areas of large growth, so the darkest purple is population growth over 1,000, and one place saw 6,000, probably Manchester. It's for each of these categories of the growth categories, there's fewer towns or cities than there were in 2010. Just thought I'd pull up some numbers just for this area where you all are located. Once again, there's the 4.6% population growth for New Hampshire. Strafford County continues to be higher than the average, than the overall state growth. Percentage growth was less than Rockingham, but higher than Hillsborough. Of course, Hillsborough still had higher numeric growth, but it's just a larger county to begin with. Some of the towns in the area, you'll see that Dover and Rochester actually had over 9% growth. They're nearly identical. And then also Barrington and Madbury had higher than 8% growth. Durham, I talked about just briefly, its growth being possibly, well, the numeric change of 852, it might have been closer to a little bit over 1,000 if it had followed our population estimates. And then Lee, among this group, had the lowest percentage increase. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about diversity in the state, and I went to the census website. You can never get finished looking at all the information that's on the census website, but they've developed something called a diversity index, and basically it measures the chance that two people chosen at random in a given geographic area will be from different racial or ethnic groups. And let's see. So nationally, the diversity index is actually over 61%. You'll notice because the three of the largest states, California, Texas, and New York, are all well up in the 60s, as is Nevada. That compares to 2010, when the national diversity index was at 54.9%. And then you'll see the three northern New England states, Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire, are all in the bottom four, West Virginia being the other one. So New Hampshire is 23.6, Vermont's 20, Maine is the lowest at 18%. So, but that's still higher, I would say, than it was in previous decades. I went ahead and made a map just of New Hampshire by county. And so if you go back, so back on this previous map, the lowest category is below 35%, okay, for the diversity index. Well, even though I shaded them from light to dark here, they're all below 35%. So not even any county in New Hampshire would have been in a higher class. That said, Hillsborough goes from Hillsborough at 33.4% down to Carroll County up there, which is at only about 12% with the diversity index. Let's see, why am I not getting it? There we go. Okay, I then tried to map racial diversity by town. I did not map the largest racial group for each town in the state, because for every single town in the state, the largest racial group was white. Just also one other thing, the diversity index back here, we actually made exclusive categories. So even though Hispanic can overlay all the racial categories, what we did instead, and the way the census did it as well, was they used Hispanic as one category. So Hispanic / all races. And then among the non-Hispanic groups, they split it out by white and black and Asian and Native American and that sort of thing. So in that case, it's looking at whether, for instance, a Hispanic person might be meeting a black person. That would count as a diversity thing. Whereas here, we're just looking at the racial categories. We're not including Hispanic. Or in other words, the Hispanic population is split up among all the different racial categories that are here. So like I said, the first map I did not make, showing every single town where the largest racial group was white. For almost the entire state, then if you look at the second largest group by town, that second largest group is almost always multiracial. So 2 or more races, people declaring that. And you've probably seen in the news that there was a great decline in the number of just white alone people in the country. But mostly that had to do with increased reporting abilities. And basically we're seeing a lot more people choosing to put down more than one race this time around. And the few areas where there's not green in the tan color, that is Hanover and Lebanon and Bedford and Durham and Somersworth. Those are the 5 communities where actually the second largest racial group was Asian. There's also white up there, which is basically uninhabited up there in the White Mountains and in Coos County. So then you get to the third largest racial group, and I don't really see a pattern here. Other than you can see really 2 main leading third racial groups, one of them being Asian, which seems to be the third largest group in half of the state, and the other one being what's called some other race, where the person filling out the form said, I don't see my race here anywhere, and put down some other race. And we're finding, this was definitely true in 2010, but it's also seems to be the case as well in 2020, that often sort of stands in for Hispanic/Latino. People will say, I'm Mexican or whatever. So again, it doesn't really show much of a pattern, but that's really what's going on in New Hampshire right now with diversity. This table was inspired by something I saw Ken Johnson talk about. Even though the census data only gives, the redistricting data only gives either total figures or voting age figures, you can, of course, therefore figure out the demographics of children by subtracting the 2. So I went and did that for the non-Hispanic race categories and then Hispanic Latino. And the first 2 columns are for the total population in the state, where it's 87% white, et cetera, on the way down. And then the second pair of columns is for children, so under 18. And you will see that diversity is greater all the way down the line, except for American Indians. And where that's made up for is the fact that there's fewer than 80% children who are white alone. So that's probably a demographic characteristic we were probably becoming aware of, but that is the case, that the children's population is leading the way, really, let's say, in terms of the trend of the state to become more racially and ethnically diverse. And I think I will stop with that. I do have this one last link here, Census Demographic Data Map Viewer, and I just again play around with that. I have it open, but basically it's pretty handy. You can zoom in and look down at census tract level, see what the race characteristics are, or the housing, how the population change has been going. So I recommend that, and that's basically what I have to share with you right now. Again, it's not a whole lot of, not as much information as we'd like to see with the results, but that's simply because of the nature of the redistricting data. I can take a few questions now, and actually, I don't think, if anybody put their hands up, I'm sorry, I just didn't even notice, so.
No, it's okay. Does anyone have any questions for Ken? Eric does.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks for thanks for coming on the Zoom with all of us and giving us that presentation. I have two questions, but I'll ask one and then I'll sit down while everybody else gets a chance. But my first one is regarding the data at the block level.
Yes.
Did I understand this correctly, that we are intentionally altering the data to protect privacy purposes? In essence, we're lying to ourselves.
Well, it's been very contentious. There are a lot of practical effects of this that, especially for areas with small populations. And for instance, in other states, there have been a lot of concern about how are the Native American populations going to be counted if people are living in really small communities and that sort of thing. So there's been a lot of basically rounds back and forth of, how can we get this to work out so that we can still have meaningful data at very small levels when necessary. But at the same time, they're really adamant about, they're tied by the way the federal law works for them specifically, that they really should not be making it obvious that, hey, there's only a family of 6 people here and they've got 4 kids and, yes.
Right.
So,
I mean, I do remember that sort of thing happening regarding COVID maps with a number of the northern towns will simply won't release the data because the population is too low. And if you say that there's a case there, that it's easily identifiable. Anyway, thanks, and I'll let somebody else go next.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions for Ken before we move on? Ken, just thank you so much. It's always good to have a base of just what the state is made up of. So I appreciate you sharing those numbers.
Great. Okay. And thanks. I enjoy being able to come and talk about it. So
awesome. Thank you. Okay. And so with that, Representative Marjorie Smith is here to talk about redistricting and to kind of play off the numbers that Ken just presented. So Marjorie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I just want to check with you. Do you want this total time to be an hour for the call?
If you go over, that's absolutely fine. If anyone has to drop off, they're welcome to do so, but we've got a
I just wanted to know what the range was. I'd like to thank Ken very much. And I'm glad that you're recording this, and I hope that it could be used by others. I, in July, spent time in, of all places, Salt Lake City, where the National Conference of State Legislators had a multi-day meeting dealing with redistricting, and a lot of the bigwigs from Census were there to explain to us exactly what Ken just did, and to help us understand, among other things, that we were going to end up with figures that might not really show what we would have expected them to show. And one of the other points that I think Ken alluded to that's important as we segue now into looking at redistricting is that in virtually every state, when they do redistricting, they do it based on census blocks. We do not do that in New Hampshire for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that in the New Hampshire House, districts can't cross county lines, and city ward lines have to be respected, and there's several other factors, but so we look at cities and towns, and we can't split towns, even though census blocks could split and tracts could split towns. So all of those are limitations, and we are limited by the U.S. Constitution, the New Hampshire Constitution, and federal and state statute in terms of what is possible and what isn't possible, and also by custom. The custom, for example, that New Hampshire House members are also the legislative body of their county. And that really isn't binding, but we would probably have some kind of at least verbal warfare if we broke that, because then what would happen about how would a legislator know? My answer, of course, is that we shouldn't be the legislative body for the county, but that's a discussion for another day. The Speaker of the House appointed a 15-member committee, the Special House Committee on Redistricting. There were 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats. That is what, in fact, it should have been, based on the fact that the party split in the legislature is very, very close. But the Speaker should be applauded for doing that, because he doesn't always follow that. For example, the New Hampshire House Finance Committee has more Republicans than would be appropriate. So that he did follow it in this situation is something that we should note. We began by when we sat down to begin our work, we agreed on, first of all, on the number of representatives, because the Constitution does not require 400. And there was some analysis that would indicate if we had 391 instead, we could most fairly divide the population into appropriate districts. The number that we were using was 3,444 persons per representative. So in fact, if there happened to be a magical town with 3,444 people in it, that town would get 1 representative, and then multiples from there. It doesn't always work that way. We began by holding listening sessions in 10 counties. I drove, in this tiny little state, I drove 1,400 miles in about 2 weeks to go to each of the 10 listening sessions, and for the public to voice their views. We then produced a series of maps, 42 maps, as it happened, produced by members of the committee, and then other maps were added by citizens, by Mapathon, by individual legislators. But the committee members produced 42 maps, immediately divided by 2, because 21 maps came from the Republicans and 21 from the Democrats. 1 map from each party for the congressional districts. 10 maps from each party by county for county commissioners, and then 10 maps for each party for the state house. The county commissioners actually, by and large, with very few exceptions, the maps ended up, and we then had public hearings, 2 public hearings in the state house, which marked the first time that I was in Reps Hall since March 13th, 2020. And they've done a lot of work there. I will tell you that they haven't yet put the chandeliers up, so I don't know what they're going to do. If the speaker decides he wants us to be in that room, cheek by jowl, before the chandeliers are ready. And then today, and in theory, we were scheduled for tomorrow, but we finished all our business today. We voted on a series of bills. Two of the bills that we had to vote on were the state Senate and the Executive Council. And we sent those bills to interim study because, in fact, it is the Senate who will take the lead on those two bills. But we kept them just in case there was a problem with what the Senate did. Then there was a bill that makes no sense for us to deal with, which has to do with the Republican convention. That should not be handled in this manner. It should be handled within the party. But in fact, there's a statute that says that we have to do that. And so we had that bill. And then we had the three remaining bills that I described for you. The county commissioner bills in our county, we vote at large. We're the only county where we vote at large. So there's nothing to discuss about districts. So that leaves 9. Of the remaining 9, in 5 of the districts, the Republicans agreed with the Democratic proposals. And then in 4, they did not agree, and because they have the majority in those 4 counties, the Republican will prevail. Then we went on to the congressional district, and I imagine all of you are familiar with the map that was proposed by the Republicans and in fact passed today on a straight party vote. A quick background: in 2018, a group called 538, which does a lot of work with numbers in all kinds of ways, set about to decide what congressional maps would look like based on the population available to them then, if they were going to draw a district that was guaranteed to be Republican, if they were going to guarantee to draw a district that was guaranteed to be Democratic, and then they had several other categories. For the purposes of this discussion, I'm just going to talk about what they did in New Hampshire in 2018. The district that they drew to guarantee Republican support was the very district, the first congressional district under their number, that the Republicans on the committee, in fact, submitted to the committee and was accepted today. That was the one to guarantee a Republican victory.
Marjorie, do you want me to share those maps that Dan sent out? Would that be helpful?
Oh, sure. I mean, if you want to, I can't do it here. So that's why I'm not doing the maps.
No, that's okay. So Eric and Katrin, I don't think you both have seen the maps. Obviously, Jeff and I have. Do you want me to share, or should I just email them out afterwards? Share now? Okay. Go ahead, Marjorie. Keep talking. I'll pull them up.
Okay. Then 538 presented the map that would be presented if you wanted to guarantee a Democratic district. And lo and behold, it is exactly the same map, because the way that map was drawn, the first district would be guaranteed Republican, and the second district would be guaranteed Democratic. And the Republicans thought this was just ducky. They were very, very happy to, in fact, commit the state to what I call is half a loaf. Some of you might know that for 3 years, I was the prime sponsor of an independent redistricting commission bill. Twice, the governor vetoed it. The third time, I couldn't even get it out of the House. And I did it because I believe the independent redistricting bill would appeal to our better angels. I had no question that if the Democrats were in the majority, the map that Amanda has up there is the current map. It's the current map. I have no question that if the, and this is the proposed map. As you could see in this map, there is a figure in the middle that I think looks like a man holding his fist up. Someone else thinks it looks like a profile of the former president. I can't quite see that, but whatever it is, this district now has, it goes from the Connecticut River to the Atlantic Ocean. Indeed, the same characteristic that the second executive council district has, and in both cases it's wrong. So that now every county in every town in Stratford County except for New Durham and Stratford are in this a district that begins on the east and goes north, west, and all the way down the western side. So it is amusing to note that Durham, Hanover, Plymouth, and Keene are all in the same district. They have something in common, you might have noticed, and lots of other towns. And that pale blue is designed to guarantee a Democrat. The dark blue in the middle is in theory guaranteed to produce a Republican for the two congressional districts. My interest in the independent redistricting attempt was to avoid this situation. Historically, we've had basically the same design for congressional districts since the 1880 census, with just slight niggling around the edge. It wasn't until the 1970 election that we were required to operate under the principle of one man, one vote. But still, the basic definition of the districts did not change. In fact, in every 10-year period when new district lines had to be drawn, the Republicans were in control. The Democrats have never been in control in a redistricting year, and they chose always not to make dramatic changes in this particular map for Congress. Even in 2010, under the leadership of a very aggressive Republican Speaker of the House, no major change was made. The Democratic proposal this time made one change. If you can switch back to that one for a moment, or switch back to the other for a moment, I can show you the one change that we made. If you go down the screen, keep on going, and if you look down near the bottom, follow the bottom, head west, there is one town that looks a little bit like a figure with its arms up. It's the second from the bottom, light blue, over as far east as you can go. And that's only one, a little bit more to the east, a little more, and up, and that's it. What we did was change that from blue to light blue. And the reason that we did that was because the difference in population between the two districts was 18,000 people. So we had to move 9,000 people from the first district to the second district. And that town happens to have 9,000 people. So by moving it from dark blue to light blue, we had to move only one town, 9,000 people, and everything else stays the same. If you were in the first district, you stay there. If you were in the second, you stay there. The Republican map that we had been looking at previous to this changes about 363,000 people, which is roughly 25% of the total state population. It changes 75 cities and towns. So on, the theory of, first do no harm, the Democrats made one small change in order to meet the constitutional requirements of one man, one vote. The Republicans made the change in this map, stated very clearly, because it was important to make it politically. Now, I don't know what you think about it, but if I were in the majority, I would not have done this, because I would have had more confidence in our ability to convince the voters that we could, as we do now, win in two counties. The Republicans, in two districts, the Republicans gave that up in the hopes that they could hold on to one congressional seat, which is what their chairman, Steve Stepanek, said many, many months ago, right after the election, that in fact they would construct districts so that they would send one conservative Republican to Washington. So they were happy to try to get one rather than two. That's what they did. And in fact, today, by a party vote, this is what will go to the floor. We might be able to reverse that on the floor of the House if, and these are two very big ifs, if we can identify maybe 10, 12 Republicans who would be willing to vote against their party. And the only group that I could think of where that might be possible are Republicans with a conscience who are not planning to run again. But it is possible. The other component is that the Speaker is insisting at the moment that we meet in Reps Hall. And there might very well be, there will be some Democrats who will decide, despite their commitment, not to attend for reasons related to health. Because as you probably know, the way you can tell a Republican from a Democrat in the legislature is that the Republicans refuse to wear masks. Apparently masks, I had missed that memo, but apparently masks are a political statement. They have nothing to do with health. They have nothing to do with responsibility to the community. They are to make a political statement. And that means that sitting with 400 of us packed very closely, there will be any number of Democrats who are sitting very close to Republicans, and they might choose not to show up. So that's the situation with Congress. It means that there's no question that Annie Kuster will run again, and it's highly unlikely that she would do anything but be reelected. The dark blue district would be the district where Chris Pappas would run, because Manchester is in the dark blue area. And what he might choose to do or not, he hasn't said, but the goal is from the Republicans, is to have Chris not prevail. He happens to be a very strong candidate, and I don't know how that will all unfold, but that's enough then. There's a lot more to be said, but that's enough on congressional district. I'm going to move to the state, and for the state districts, I'm just going to, because I'm looking at the time, I'm just going to talk about Stratford County and where, which is our base. This is the Democratic map, and one way you can tell it's the Democratic map is that Stratford and New Durham, over there on the west and the north, in the current district divisions, are in the same district, even though they touch only at that one point. And the Democratic map changed that. The Democratic map did several other things. We felt very strongly that that it was time for Rollinsford and Somersworth to be able to have their own district without having to be part of one or more Dover wards. We thought Dover should be able to stand on its own. We thought Rochester should be able to stand on its own. And in those two towns, it's up to the cities to construct the ward lines, making population even. And we're just waiting for that to happen. But the Democrats had them in their own districts. Now let's go to what the Republican map does. The Republican map, in terms of Lee, creates a 3-person district with Lee, Madbury, and Dover Ward 4. So there are 3 seats in that district. And they separate Madbury from Durham. Durham goes from 5 to 4 seats, but that it stands alone. Now, in terms of the current representation for Durham and Madbury, it happens that 4 incumbents come from Durham and 1 from Madbury. So the 4 Durham incumbents are there, and the 1 Madbury incumbent, who happens to be Janet Wall, would be in this group with Dover Ward 4, Lee, and Madbury with 3 seats. In addition, we have, as you well know, something that is so bizarre that none of the standard redistricting maps can be used. We have something called a floterial. And what it is a district that floats above what we would refer to as the base districts, such as the two I just explained, one being Durham and one being Dover, Lee, and Madbury, Dover Ward 4 and Lee and Madbury. And the floterial, because we still have a few more people who have to be accounted for, is a 1-seat floterial with Dover Ward 4, all of Durham, all of Lee, and all of Madbury. So in each of these towns and in Dover, people will go to the polls and be highly confused because they will be asked to vote in 2 different House districts. And they'll say, wait a minute, which one should I vote in? I'm only one person or one house or one family. I can't possibly be in 2 districts. Wrong. You are in 2 House districts. Logical? No. Explainable? Well, not easily. But that is what a floterial district does. And that, again, is necessary because we can't cross county lines. We can't divide towns. We can't divide wards. And so we have to figure out how to adjust numbers so that we have, in theory, 1 person, 1 vote. I think I've talked too long already. This is a lot of material to cover, and I can guarantee you that there will be no test at the end of the day, and there's no quiz. But I know I'm always available to answer questions today or any other day, and don't anybody think that they're going to be able to understand this all easily without spending a lot of time. So, Amanda, is that about what you wanted to hear from me?
It is. You gave a wonderful description of the process. This was great. Obviously, I know I had been holding on to the maps. I had shared them with Jeff and a couple people in Barrington because they were quite a dramatic change for at least my district. And so I appreciate you sharing. I know that Eric and Katrin hadn't heard this yet. And I'm guessing anyone else who watches this has not heard it yet. So are there any questions for Marjorie?
Jeff either is in a state of shock or he'll have a question. I don't know which.
Eric has a question.
I've got a comment, I've got a question, and then if it doesn't come up, I've got one more quick one. So first, the comment. It seems to me that you have an alternative argument to make to Republicans in the House to go with the older style map, which is that if you are a Republican in the State House in the 2nd district, if you vote for this map, you have 0 chance of ever getting elected to the House of Representatives. And so if you have ambitions on higher office, you can kiss them goodbye.
You're absolutely right, Eric. And that is something that we talked about actually today. Only 1 person in the 2 days of hearings supported this bill, this version. And he said, this is really very good because in order to get to do well in Washington, you have to be in the majority and have seniority. And by us having purple districts, people come and go. You know, sometimes it's a Republican, sometimes a Democrat. And this way, we can guarantee that the incumbent could build up seniority. Well, you know, that's if what these districts are for, to protect incumbents, not to represent the wishes of the electorate. But your point is absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my question. By redrawing the map, I thought I read this in an article, but I'm hoping you will either confirm or deny this for me, is that the second district becomes heavily Democratic, but the first district is not all that Republican leaning. Am I correct in that?
Well, the numbers are, it's difficult in terms of numbers, but the big district is overwhelmingly Democratic. The little district in the middle, of course, the population is equal in the two, but just the one that geographically is smaller is not as extreme as the larger district is. So the light blue is overwhelmingly Democratic. The second one isn't. And that is more of a point that I made quickly before, that it is very possible that with a very strong campaign, Chris could retain his seat. Whereas it would be almost impossible for a Republican to win in the other district. So you are on target, Eric.
Thank you. And then do we have maps for the Senate, the state Senate and the executive council?
No, the executives, the Senate marches to its own drummer. The Senate first of all, they appointed a special committee, and then they decided, no, they're not going to do that. They're going to have it go to the Senate Election Law Committee. And their calendar is a little different. They're not going to begin the process till sometime in January for both the state Senate and the executive council. And the procedure, which I just glossed over, is that by perhaps before, but by the end of March, when we kind of switch bills between the two houses, the bills that start in the Senate, which would be the state Senate Executive Council, will come to the House, and the bills that start in the House will go to the Senate. They'll go there much earlier than the end of March. And the custom is that each house just routinely supports the work of the other house. So in other words, the Senate bills, the bill about the Senate seats would not be altered in the House, and the Senate would not alter the House bill unless they really wanted to shake things up.
And we have no reason to think that they would, right?
We have no reason. There is no way that any reasonable person would ever suggest that they could figure out what the Senate's going to do.
Okay.
Including the senators.
Jeff, you want to ask your question?
I have an observation and a question, and the question is for Ken, and it's going to be a curveball. I hope he's going to prepare while I'm making a comment. I just wanted to say that this still has to get through the House, and it has to pass the governor's veto. So it ain't a done deal. It's close to it, but it ain't a done deal. The interesting question, which I'd like to toss to Ken, is that the districting is based on 2020 census data, but as Ken, I think, will agree, population demographics are notoriously flexible. It's a dynamic, it changes. And I suspect that we will continue to have an influx of voters from other states, from Massachusetts, moving into the 1st and 2nd congressional districts. And that could very well change the mathematics over the next decade. Ken, I wonder what your take might be on that.
Yeah, that's something I didn't really touch on, but again, listening to Ken Johnson recently, he does a lot of work studying migration. And while, backing up a little bit, the state's population lately has only been growing because of migration. In fact, in the last 3 or 4 years, there have been more deaths than births in New Hampshire. So we're actually not seeing any natural increase. So we're getting migration in, but of course, we're also getting migration out. And if you count all that in, I was astounded at in the last 10 years, what the number is of people who are living here now, the turnover in the population. So you're absolutely right that there could be something, we don't know what's going to, and it's certainly we don't know what's going to happen in terms of the political makeup of the.
But Jeff, there is no provision for alteration
Right.
during the next decade. It is true that in the last, there were some things that were done that was so clearly inappropriate that as the result of both a combination of court and legislative action, there had to be some rejiggering, but not for the whole state, only for a couple of towns.
I must say, this has been extremely informative.
Well, I'm glad. And people don't, I mean, if you saw the emails that came in by the hundreds, my delete finger has a blister on it. People, you could see from what they said, they really didn't understand. And I don't blame them. I mean, somebody said, I don't know why we're doing this at all. We shouldn't be redistricting. We should just keep things the way they are. Well, there are requirements and obligations, constitutional and statutory. A lot of people just said, I support the Republican maps. And we would write back and say, great. Could you tell us what you particularly like about those maps as compared with the Democratic maps or the Mapathon maps or others? And, the response, if there was any, was because these are Republican. Whereas the Democrats, People's Party went on and on and on and on. Anything else?
Katrin, you came on video. Did you want to say anything?
No, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a black space, but yeah, no, I'm sorry I jumped on late select board meeting, but this has been really helpful. Did you happen to go through do we have the census information for the town of Lee, diversity wise? Was that in the beginning?
I did not publish that. I didn't put that up on a slide.
Okay.
So that is something that if you want to, did I leave my email address? I'm not sure if I did.
Yeah, I've been trying to find that for a long time. I would love to get that from somebody.
Okay. Was there a comment? Can we do comments on here? I haven't.
Yes, I will.
Yes, go to chat.
Chat, there it is. Okay.
And I'll send it
Copy
out too when I send out your slides and recording of this.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and watch the recording later so I get the stuff I missed. Thank
Okay,
you.
there's my email.
Are there any other questions or comments for our speakers? Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. Thanks again to Marjorie and Ken. And then I will, as soon as I get the slides, I will email it out to the committee. And of course, if there are any other questions, feel free to send them to me and I'll send them over to Ken and Marjorie, or you can just email them directly.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for inviting me. My neighboring town, and now we're in we might very well end up in a floterial together.
Right. Who knows
Okay.
what Jeff and I will do. So
Okay, thank you
All right.
very, very much.
Thank you all.
you.
Thanks for inviting me. It's nice to meet you all.
Bye.
All right, bye.